legacy are found worldwide to this very day. Theories of its location and description are boundless.
Archaeological interpretation of Atlantis suggests that it was placed someplace in the western Mediterranean.
I believe the heart of Atlantis was in Costa Rica.
Atlantis exists only in the minds of creative writers and thinkers.
Antarctica was at one point in a temperate area, and that's where Atlantis was.
Is Atlantis a myth, or like ancient Troy, is it a lost civilization waiting to be discovered? One man believes he has the answer, and it lies in South America.
Welcome to Atlantis. It's the most famous, most fabulous, most sought-after lost city in the whole of history.
Fable or fantasy, fact or fiction. For almost 3 millennia, mankind has been fascinated by stories of Atlantis. In the 4th century BC, the Greek philosopher Plato, called the greatest thinker of his time, committed to paper a history of a legendary lost continent. The exact origins of the Atlantis legend are obscure. It is believed that the story was passed down to Plato from Socrates and a poet named Solon, who learned of the vanished culture from an Egyptian priest. In Timaeus and Critias, the 2 dialogues that he devoted to Atlantis, Plato left us with a detailed and comprehensive description of the land itself. His eloquent words serve as a map for an intrepid explorer to follow.
The island of Atlantis was in the ocean, opposite the Pillars of Hercules, and was larger than Libya and Asia combined. Midway along the longest side, next to the sea, there was a large, level, rectangular plain. It was enclosed by mountains and high above the level of the ocean. It contained volcanoes and was prone to earthquakes and floods. The mountains contained gold, silver, copper, tin, and a natural alloy of copper and gold called orichalcum. The plain had a system of large and small canals, as well as natural hot and cold springs. The land was fertile and its crops abundant. On the plain, there was a capital city which was surrounded by concentric rings of land and water. The city was encompassed by a wall of red, white, and black stone.
Will a successful interpretation of these elements unlock the mystery of Atlantis?
Plato describes Atlantis as an island lying outside the Straits of Gibraltar, or the Pillars of Hercules, as the Greeks called them. It was an island bigger than Libya and Asia put together.
Because they had a very different idea in the 4th century about the way the world was arranged, it's difficult for us to understand exactly what Plato meant by Libya and Asia combined.
Probably for our present purposes, we could say that Libya is more or less equivalent to North Africa, whereas Asia would be modern Turkey and the Middle East.
From Plato's perspective in Greece, Atlantis would have existed in the Atlantic Ocean. As a result, the majority of searches for the lost continent have until now focused on the ocean floor. But Jim Allen, a cartographer and former aerial intelligence interpreter for England's Royal Air Force, examined Plato's writings with a fresh perspective and discovered what he believes is the geographic essence of Plato's legend.
Plato said that there was a continent which existed on the opposite side, opposite to the Straits of Gibraltar. And since there is no other continent, lost or otherwise, in the space in between, that continent has got to be the continent that we call South America.
Combining satellite imagery with a practical knowledge of ancient measuring systems, Allen believes that he has successfully corroborated nearly all of Plato's physical descriptions of Atlantis. He is confident he has found the fabled civilization high among the jagged peaks of the Andes, hidden along the vast plain called the Altiplano.
20 years ago, when I first got the satellite pictures, I found what, to me, looked very much like the remains of the very vast canal that Plato talked about.
The vast canal that Alan describes bisects the level plain of the Altiplano in this satellite image. At its widest point, it is nearly 600 feet from side to side, almost an exact match for Plato's description.
Plato said that the canal was so wide and it's incredible, nobody would believe it had been made by hand. That's exactly what it is. It's difficult for people to believe that this could be made by people instead of being a natural feature. And what Plato said was Atlantis was a continent. In the center of the continent, next to the sea, midway along the longest side, there was a level rectangular plain. The plain was elevated high above the level of the ocean sea.
These satellite images show the placement of the Altiplano in relation to the continent of South America and the Pacific Ocean. It does appear to fit Plato's descriptions. Over 102 miles in width and nearly 300 miles in length, the Altiplano is in fact the largest level rectangular plain in the world. Plato recorded the dimensions of the plain in stades, a standard unit of measurement used by ancient Greek mathematicians. One stade equals 600 feet, but in South America, the stade is only 300 feet.
The stade which we have found here by physically measuring the length of the plain is a unit of 300 feet, which is half a Greek stade. And this is perfectly logical because the Greek stade was 1/10 of a minute of latitude, hence 600 feet. But the people in ancient America didn't count in tens, they counted in 20s. So 1/20th of a minute of latitude is the stade which we have actually found here and is a unit of 300 feet.
When Plato's dimensions of the plain are converted, we must look for an area of land that measures 113 by 171 miles. The only region in the Americas that could possibly accommodate a plain of this size is the Altiplano.
The plain was enclosed by mountains. Mountains contain gold, silver, copper, and tin. And the whole place was subject to earthquakes and floods. This is a perfect description of the Bolivian Altiplano.
To fully understand Jim Allen's claim, we must have a strong visual sense of Plato's legendary city.
The capital city, Atlantis, was located on a large rectangular plain. The city was connected to the sea by a canal which the kings of the city had built. The city itself consisted of a central mountain and then concentric rings of earth and water.
Plato tells us that beyond the boundaries of the city, the Atlanteans harnessed their land by way of sophisticated irrigation techniques.
All around the edge of this rectangular plain was a huge canal. From this major canal, other smaller canals and irrigation ditches crisscrossed the plain, and thus the inhabitants of Atlantis could control the water flow to help in their agriculture.
Plato said that the land was extremely fertile and brought forth 2 crops per year. Also within the whole continent there was every conceivable type of fruit and thing to eat. And you've only got to go and look at any of the local marketplaces. The ancient people who lived here actually genetically created new food strains. The potatoes is 250 to 350 types, different types of potato, and about 250 types of maize.
However, some experts disagree with Jim Allen and his belief that Atlantis existed in South America.
The Altiplano has been a forbidding and harsh environment for the last 10 to 15 million years. There is no connection whatsoever of a thriving agricultural populace like Plato describes for the civilization of Atlantis in this location. It simply is not physically possible to do this.
The Altiplano region of Bolivia was, and is still to this day, a land rich in mineral wealth. Hidden deep beneath this mountainous terrain is an alloy called orichalcum, which Plato himself described. In his dialogues on Atlantis, Plato wrote that the value of orichalcum was second only to that of gold.
La conformación Well, the mineral compositions found in Bolivia are extremely complex. You're able to find the most unlikely alloys that exist nowhere else. As you dig deeper into the earth, you'll start to find complex combinations of copper, gold, and tin, which is orichalcum.
Orichalcum is especially intriguing since it's found in the Andes and nowhere else on Earth. Then there's the name Atlantis itself, which deepens the mystery.
Plato named his mythological island Atlantis, presumably because he was connecting it with the giant titan Atlas, who held up the sky.
There exists, however, another theory, which potentially strengthens Alan's case. When translated, the Aztec word atl becomes water, and the Inca word antis becomes copper.
How is it possible for Plato to invent two South American words like Atl and Antis and put together the name called Atlantis when these words come directly from this continent presently called South America?
When we return, we will join Jim Allen in his search for Atlantis in the Andes. For Jim Allen, enough of Plato's descriptions had fallen into place, allowing him to embark on this, his fifth expedition to the Altiplano. This time, Allen would focus solely on locating the capital city of Atlantis. His search would lead him to Pampalogos, a dormant volcano surrounded by oceans of sand and rock. The distinct white band that encircles the base of the volcano was only one of a series of Plato's points that Allen believes he has found at Pampalogos.
He said it was, the low mountain was near the plain, over against its center, at a distance of 50 stades. And what it means is it's midway along the rectangular plain on the side next to the sea, and it was a distance of 50 stades from the sea. So this location, first of all, is in the exact required geographic location. The second and most easy thing to say about it is that it has in fact got the red, black and white stones that Plato mentioned. On top of that, it has actually circular canal formations, which is very important. These were the natural harbours, and these were enclosed by rings of land, which are also found on the site itself.
Pampalogos is the main candidate that anyone has ever come up with in the entire planet that could match Plato point for point.
Allen believes that it was here that the royal city of Atlantis existed before sinking into a vast inland ocean. An ocean that has since receded into narrow tributaries and smaller bodies of water, leaving behind little more than a dry, desolate seabed. This inland ocean was comprised of the waters of Lake Pupo, the Desaguadero River, and far-off Lake Titicaca. Allen's theory does have merit, even among his dissenters.
All the geological and paleoclimatic evidence we have right now suggests that much of the Titicaca Basin was covered by a very large lake around 25,000 years ago. And most of that can be explained by the greater precipitation that occurred during that period of time. So at one point, there was a very large glacial lake called Lake Cauca that covered this region.
Regardless of his convictions, Jim Allen is a scientist. In keeping with that tradition, he is reluctant to let personal beliefs influence something as monumental as locating the site of Atlantis.
I want to be absolutely certain it is the correct site before I say it is the correct site. And that means not just seeing it in the distance, it means actually climbing over it, going in the canals, finding things like the perimeter wall. Then one can say with absolute certainty that it is the correct site.
The handheld global positioning system that Allen carries works in conjunction with 12 orbital satellites. By process of triangulation, the system gives a readout in latitude and longitude anywhere in the world. This allows Allen to plot his exact position on the Altiplano.
I took a reading with the GPS, and I plotted it on the map which I had with me, and it worked out exactly the 50 stades of 300 foot, which Plato gave as a dimension that the seawall should be from the central city.
On a cliff above the windswept plain, Allen searches for this massive perimeter wall, which Plato described as circling the ancient city. Locating the wall that Plato credited as being the protective barrier between the city and the sea is another crucial factor in pinpointing the site of Atlantis.
Yes, according to Plato, the city was surrounded by a sea wall, a wall which began at the sea and ran round in a complete circle at a distance of 50 stades from the ring of the city itself. And that's exactly what we're on at the moment. We actually found a section of the wall remaining just there. It was about 1,200 feet wide, which is wide enough to support all the houses that Plato said on it.
Plato's dialogues indicated that the wall served as more than just a foundation for the houses. The concentric ring would also allow the citizens to reclaim the land from the lake bed and create an island.
The city, which is now on dry land, would at that point then become an island.
Alan double-checked the readings of the GPS with a tactical navigation map of the Altiplano. This map divides the region into grids with lines for latitude and longitude. By converting the stades to meters, he manually plotted the position. The figures matched. For Alan, the wall would appear to be exactly where it should be.
Well, I'm sitting right on the edge of the seawall, which is exactly at the correct distance of 50 stades of 300 feet from the city. And what is curious about it is, before leaving England, I actually penciled in a circle at the correct distance, and there it is bang on the edge of the circle. That it actually measures this dimension, further confirms that this is in fact the city of Atlantis, because this is really just the absolute proof.
Has Jim succeeded where so many others have failed? Though he has found an area of the world that bears striking resemblance to Plato's empire, some experts think his conclusions are premature.
In Jim's case, he's gone about his homework the right way. He's come up with an idea, which is, I think, a very intelligent and interesting idea, correlated it to Plato's myth, and then gone to the Altiplano to map it all out for himself, which is exactly his field of expertise. And I think he's done a terrific job of doing that. That said, whether or not this is really Atlantis, that's another matter altogether.
Some stones are about, must be 5 foot high.
Regardless of his detractors, Alan feels that the Altiplano region is filled with evidence that Plato was, in fact, writing about this elevated plain.
The whole of South America was the continent of Atlantis, and if what Plato said was true, it was divided into 10 kingdoms. The largest and best kingdom was the part about the royal city, which is the part about Lake Popo, which in turn is more or less the whole of Bolivia.
In his dialogues, Plato did indeed write that Atlantis was divided into 10 different kingdoms.
The nearby plain in which Jim Allen believes Atlantis resided could be, for me, perhaps one of 10 Atlantises in the Americas. And I say 10 because Plato says that Atlantis was divided into 10 kingdoms.
If South America is in fact Atlantis, as Alan believes, it becomes necessary to look for evidence of these 10 kingdoms in other areas of the continent as well. North of Pampa Lagos is Lake Titicaca, known as the Lake at the Roof of the World. At 12,500 feet above sea level, it is the Earth's highest navigable lake. Covering some 2,800 square miles, it is more properly known as an inland sea. It is filled with mysteries as vast as the lake itself.
The lake could have been created during the formation of the Andes mountain range. It has been theorized that the Altiplano, the current Bolivian Altiplano, was at the bottom of the ocean and was part of the sea for some time, because paleontological evidence of primitive life, for example, trilobites, have been discovered in areas of the Altiplano.
Existing in many diverse forms over a period of 300 million years, the trilobite was one of the earliest inhabitants of the Earth's oceans.
Lake Titicaca itself is considered neither a freshwater nor saltwater lake, but rather it's between the two. When the ground shifted up, it separated the region from the ocean, trapping salt water inside the continent.
Could the unusual saline content of the lake be the result of a terrestrial rising or tectonic shift? As with nearly everything else about this region, the experts subscribe to various, often conflicting theories.
Some people would like to connect the salinity of Lake Titicaca to some sort of relationship to one of the oceans, either the Atlantic or Pacific. It's fairly clear that we understand now that over the last 25,000 years, the lake level of Titicaca has risen and fallen rather dramatically. It rises during periods of very high precipitation, making the water quite fresh. During periods of low precipitation, when the lake level drops, the lake becomes more saline because of the composition of the soils and the bedrock geology of the region.
Could Titicaca hold the keys to unlock the mysteries of Atlantis? To fully understand the secrets that the lake holds, we must go beneath the surface. Myths of Lake Titicaca have been passed down through successive generations of inhabitants of the Altiplano.
You talk to people from the lake region, especially the older people, they tell you stories of legends of cities that have been sunken in the lake, docks that were closer to the surface before, and as the lake grew, the docks disappeared. When the lake is lower, you can actually see these docks or underwater cities or underwater construction under the lake.
Recent exploration has uncovered compelling evidence that shows that these local legends may be more than just stories. An international team of archaeologists, known as ACACOR, have found what they believe to be a series of miniature temples and altars at the bottom of Lake Titicaca.
Bueno, el sitio es un solo templo, con varias superposiciones culturales. Estamos hablando más o menos...
Well, the actual site is one entire temple with various cultural temples stacked on top of one another. We are talking about 9 meters to 19 meters below the level of the water. But we must continue our investigations.
These alleged temples are only part of Titicaca's treasures. At 90 feet below the surface, could these ruins be the remains of docks and structures local myths describe?
The whole region around Lake Titicaca is just covered with ruins that no one has any explanation for. So it's entirely likely that there are ruins under the lake bed. The idea of there being sunken temples is not impossible.
Is there a connection between the lake and Atlantis? Could this be home to one of Plato's 10 Atlantean kingdoms?
We understand extremely well what the timeline is of the development of the civilizations in the Titicaca Basin is, and people could dig for the next 500 years and they still would never find Atlantis there because Atlantis never was there.
For the moment, Lake Titicaca remains a mystery. Perhaps future expeditions will reveal the truth behind the temple ruins and the local myths of ports and cities beneath the surface. In Bolivia, just south of the Titicaca lake bed, there exists one of the great unsolved mysteries of South America, an ancient ruined city known today as Tiwanaku. Some experts believe that Tiwanaku is the only excavated portion of the 10 kingdoms of Atlantis. Some believe it to be the oldest civilization on the planet. There lies the ancient city of Tiwanaku, thought by some to be the oldest city in the world. It may be the only visible remnant of the 10 kingdoms of Plato's Atlantis.
It has been said that people in Tiwanaku seem to have followed on from a lost, missing culture, and this culture is undoubtedly the culture of Atlantis, because Tiwanaku would appear to have followed on from where Atlantis left off.
Is it possible, as Alan believes, that Tiwanaku became the caretaker to the legacy of Atlantis?
When we look at the Altiplano, we find that there are independent city-states dotted all over the region. So probably there were at least 10 kingdoms of Atlantis. And the culture and the civilization around Tiwanaku is probably one of the most prominent.
If these theories are true, it could mean that a portion of Atlantis has literally been hiding in plain sight. Needless to say, these allegations have challengers among the scientific community.
We have no reason to believe that there is any influence from other places that allowed the civilization to develop in this place at that time. We can see this very clearly by studying the evidence of the archaeological cultures that existed before Tiwanaku, and we can see very clearly the way in which these somewhat simpler societies evolved into the most complicated political entity that is found in the Titicaca Basin at this time.
However, recent findings amongst the ruins of Tiwanaku have shed new light on ancient civilizations that could change long-held beliefs about the history of Earth itself.
The standard idea that archaeologists have about human civilization in the Americas is that no human beings were here any earlier than about 12,000 years ago. And as far as civilizations go, they don't think there were any civilizations in the Americas any earlier than about 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. The city of Tiwanaku challenges the conventional ideas of civilization in South America.
Known as the highest city in the ancient world, Tiwanaku was once a populous urban center. While most archaeologists familiar with the site place its time of existence around 300 BC, there is some speculation that the city is in fact considerably older.
There are also sculptures in some of the temples at Tiwanaku that resemble elephants. And of course, elephants don't live today in North or South America, but over 10,000 years ago, they did.
At first glance, the skill and superior workmanship in the design and construction of Tiwanaku's walls, temples, and structures is obvious. Closer inspection reveals much about the level of sophistication that the city's population must have possessed. Metal clamps called tenons have been found binding giant monolithic blocks together. Researchers believe that this is perhaps one of the earliest uses of metal for structural purposes. Analysis have determined that these tenons were made from an alloy of copper and nickel.
In order to fuse copper and nickel, you need to have a temperature of 3,500 degrees. Our own civilization only came up with this technology in the 1930s. Yet here, at what we are now considering to be the most ancient city on the face of the earth, we have that type of technology.
It is the use of advanced metallurgy such as this that has helped fuel speculation that Tiwanaku was one time part of the kingdom of Atlantis. If this is true, then our traditional perception of the linear advancement of civilization and technology could be incorrect.
History does not go in a straight line from primitive old cavemen to smart old us with our hydrogen bombs and striped toothpaste and worldwide pollution, but that there were, in fact, stages of civilization that went down, disappeared under cataclysmic conditions, in which civilizations were at least as advanced as ourselves and much more sophisticated in many ways.
Jim Allen believes that there exists ample physical evidence that Tiwanaku was at one time a thriving seaport whose ships set sail to every corner of the world.
Well, I'm sitting on the what they call the dock area of Pumapunku, which is the port area of Tiwanaku, and we've got steps like a landing stage, which is very much worn down. It's quite logical that this would have been a port for the city because most ports are built at centers of commerce, route centers.
While this controversial theory is not officially endorsed, Bolivian archaeologists acknowledge the possibility.
One of the theories postured by the engineer Posnanski was that the lake was at this level and that it was a port to the west of Pumapunka, where we have a type of T-shaped area where they disembarked. Archaeological evidence of the T's does exist, and we don't discount the theory that the water could have risen to this level, creating a port.
Also, like Plato's Atlanteans, the Tiwanakans appear to have had a keen understanding and practical knowledge of astronomy and solar cycles.
We know that the Tiahuanaco civilization had a great and vast understanding of astronomy, clearly demonstrated in the extremely precise astronomical-based solar and lunar calendars. Their knowledge of astronomy is also reflected in their architectural designs. Each temple and structure served as an astrological observatory, plus, guided by their command of astrology, their architectural dimensions converted these structures into physical representations of calendars.
Perhaps the most intriguing mystery surrounding Tiwanaku is the Gateway of the Sun, a 10-foot-high stone monument that researchers believe to be the centerpiece in a large celestial calendar.
People of this time, the ancient peoples, were celestial observers. They were constantly watching the movement of the skies. They were building monuments that were sightlines that defined precisely the rising of the sun at the vernal equinox.
But the alignment of the gateway of the sun does not correspond to the alignment of the sun during the vernal equinox of modern day. In 1915, archaeoastronomer Arthur Poznański shocked the scientific world with a controversial explanation for this discrepancy.
The reason why we can be so specific about the dating of these alignments is there's something called the precessional wobble. The Earth wobbles on its axis such that the spring equinox moves backwards through the zodiac once every 13,000 years. Now, this has been dated by astronomers. Now, this allowed Poznański to say very clearly that the monuments were built to take advantage of the precessional tilt, so the sun would rise at the right place at a very specific date. The problem is the date he arrived at was 15,000 BC.
Ancient builders were as precise exactly as they wanted to be in their buildings. And that being the case, we should believe that Tiwanaku was built at least 12,000 years ago, making it a very good candidate for Atlantis.
Arthur Poznański's unorthodox theories on the age of Tiwanaku and the gateway of the sun are not accepted by everyone in his field.
We know for a fact now, using radiocarbon dating, associating with the ruins that we've already encountered in the Titicaca Basin, especially at Tiwanaku, we're certain that the site was reached its zenith of development by about 500 to 600 AD, and it actually was founded sometime around 200 to 300 BC.
Carved into the eastern facade along this portal is an intricate array of hieroglyphics that researchers refer to as the calendar frieze. Tiwanaku experts believe that this intricate pattern of stark, raised figures holds a key to a code that so far remains locked. And just like Plato's work on Atlantis, the frieze was never completed. What caused the inscribers to abruptly end their painstaking task and abandon it forever? Did they choose to stop? Or were more ominous forces at play?
We do know that something happened to the Americas 12,000 years ago, because the mammoth, the American horse, the American camel, the woolly mastodon, saber-toothed tiger, all disappeared at the time that Plato gave to the destruction of Atlantis.
More mysteries of Atlantis when we return. If we are to believe Jim Allen's assertion that the lost capital of Atlantis was located on top of the Andes, then the logical question becomes,
how does a landlocked civilization high in the Altiplano become a major seafaring nation, able to get over into the Mediterranean and carry out wars against the Greeks and the Egyptians and so on? This is a big problem, and you can't just push this one off to the side.
Jim believes the answer lies in the interpretation of Plato's words.
It's important to remember that Plato said the region about the city was the level plain, and this in turn was high above the level of the sea, meaning the ocean sea. So in respect of the altiplano, we have to remember, on the first hand, of this route of river and lake navigation, which is the ships coming of all quarters to the city of Atlantis, but to reach the destinations by ocean, you had to have porters and yamas to take merchandise from the high level down to the low level where the ocean-going ports would have been.
Reed ships are the oldest known form of transportation across the waters of the Altiplano and the Titicaca Basin. They are the traditional product of the indigenous Aymara people of the region. The Aymara are thought to be the descendants of the elusive founders of Tiwanaku.
I am working on several projects at the moment. One of them is to construct a vessel for interoceanic travel by integrating techniques from our ancient cultures. With this project, we want to demonstrate to the whole world, to all the scientists and investigators, that the Aymara culture and the Tiwanacan culture have the technical know-how, and we maintain the technology used to sail in the seas, which we inherited from our ancestors. Yes, the Aymaras and the Tiwanacans and the lost city of Atlantis can sail the high seas. We can sail the seas, and we will prove it with these projects.
If successful, Allen believes that these expeditions could serve as further proof for his theory of Atlantis and its subsequent expansion across the globe.
So it's very probable that the first people to crossing the oceans used reed ships. The first people to arrive in Egypt came from South America.
But it's quite clear that people, to get, for instance, to the island of the Sun, which is in the southern part of the lake itself, they would have had to have used some kind of reed boat to make it out there. However, that does not mean that these boats were then taken anyplace else, to the Pacific coast, for instance, and used to circumnavigate the globe.
I think that the city of Atlantis is in Bolivia. That is, it can be found in Bolivia because during the time of Atlantis, they sailed in gigantic reed ships.
As was proven in 1947 by anthropologist Thor Heyerdahl, these reed ships are capable of crossing the oceanic gap that separates the eastern and western hemispheres. They could have been used to transport exotic goods and delicacies between the countries.
According to Plato, in Atlantis they had relationships with powers overseas, as he puts it, a great supply of imports from abroad.
Possibly the most compelling evidence for interoceanic cultural exchanges lies in the 5,500-year-old mummies of Egypt, which have been shown to contain both traces of cocaine and tobacco. Now, the coca leaf and the tobacco leaf are native to the Americas, and 5,500 years ago grew only there and in no other part of the world.
There are other bits and pieces of evidence in Egypt itself, and this ties in with the whole notion of a legendary and perhaps global civilization that has left certain artifacts, particularly in South America, Tiahuanaco and Machu Picchu.
With each claim or theory, the mystery of Atlantis seems to deepen. For the true believers, however, the solution to the puzzle is close enough to touch.
So all of the television specials, the books that have come out, even if people are skeptical, all will help toward the ultimate discovery and validation of Atlantis. Look at Heinrich Schliemann and his discovery of Troy. Look how he was ridiculed in his lifetime, and yet Troy is now valid. There have just been endless things that have been discovered, and Atlantis is the next one. We're ready for Atlantis now.
In the 20 years since discovering what he considers to be evidence of Atlantis, Jim Allen has succeeded in raising some interesting possibilities. Possibilities that will continue to elude us without concentrated research and excavation.
Bueno, yo soy muy amplio en cuanto a teorías porque creo que...
I'm very open to different types of theories because I feel that we've just started to find out the history of the Andes. We have more to do and much more to excavate archaeologically, so we can't really discard any theories.
One of the major problems that we are facing at the moment, which is practically interrupting our excavations, is the economic problems the country is enduring.
Excavations, such as the site at Tiahuanaco, have suffered due to a lack of funds. Compared to Mexico's Chichen Itza or Machu Picchu in Peru, Tiahuanaco is a relatively untouched area.
I believe it's more important to work in Tiahuanaco because only 3.5% of this area has been excavated, and we still have about 96.5% of the area that needs to be investigated.
With what we have learned from the tiny piece of Tiahuanaco that has been explored, we are left to ponder what secrets might be revealed with an even more thorough excavation.
This is the thrill about Bolivia. There are so many things to see that people haven't yet found. 30,000 known archaeological sites that have not yet been explored. This could be 30,001, who knows? That's the thrill of coming here.
The conclusion when we return. Debate that surrounds everything about Atlantis, from its culture, its history, and its location, to whether or not it existed at all, is sure to remain a preeminent source of wonder that will continue to fuel our uniquely human desire for an understanding of our planet, our existence, and ultimately, ourselves.
People have strong beliefs about Atlantis because they want it to be so. And we all have our myths that we like to believe. Scientists, though, operate in a different fashion. That is, we have to have convincing, comprehensive, and credible evidence of a phenomenon to begin to understand whether or not that phenomenon could in fact be explained.
Were the dialogues of Plato nothing more than his attempt to address the evils of an increasingly corrupt society?
I think that a very important thing to realize about Plato's tale of Atlantis is that it's written for philosophical purposes. And the story of Atlantis is a cautionary tale. It shows that if you're greedy, if you want too much, if you have too much imperial ambition, you're going to forget about the pursuit of virtue and strive just for naked power. And Plato knows, as we all know, that power corrupts.
Atlantis is a metaphor. It's a narrative tool by Plato to talk about the bigger issues of his age and of ours, of course, too, and that is, what is the nature of a perfect society and how can it go wrong?
Or was Plato writing about an actual civilization which existed and spread its influence throughout the known world before vanishing in a cataclysmic upheaval?
When you read the account that he gives of Atlantis in the Timaeus and in the Critias, in my judgment, it has a slightly different feel to it. It is portrayed by Plato as something more than a story, as though this actually is rooted in some basic account that he received.
There's a difference between legend and myth. A myth is a story about something that never ever existed, but a legend is a story which has a basis in truth. So in fact, Atlantis is a legend. It's a legend of a people who lived on this continent, on this level plane.
So we must ask ourselves the question, like the kingdoms of the Maya or the forbidden temples of Angkor Wat, is Atlantis yet another lost civilization waiting to be found?
Homer wrote about an ancient place called Troy, and Schliemann actually found it. Plato has written about an ancient continent called Atlantis. Has Jim Allen found it?
Well, on the one hand, we've got this ancient legend by the Greek philosopher Plato, which describes this continent with this level plain, with the gold, the silver, the copper, and the canals, the thermal springs, and all the rest of it. On the other hand, we've got this location that actually matches Plato's description. The logical conclusion is this is the place that Plato talked about.
The ruins we find on the ground would tend to indicate that South America and the Altiplano in particular may be the cradle of civilization. It may be the oldest civilization on the planet, and therefore a very likely possibility for Atlantis.
Has Jim Allen, through a methodical blend of modern technology and ancient theory, found the most celebrated lost civilization in history?
All of the details that Plato included are pretty much explained and covered by Jim Allen's work. Too many times, concepts and ideas may sound good, but if they don't fit the details, it's just not going to fly. But Jim Allen's work seems to have done just that. It's covered all the details.
There is no possibility that the South American continent is the home of Atlantis. Everything we know about South American civilization says that it evolved locally from the American Indian descendants that we see today.
Though the evidence that has led Jim Allen to believe he has located Atlantis is far from conclusive, like so many of life's mysteries, the question cannot be answered definitively, at least not at this time. If it's not Atlantis that Allen has found spread out across this remote plain, what is it that he's uncovered? The remains of an ancient and unknown civilization? Or is it nothing more than geographic and cultural features that coincide with the works of Plato? Researchers Jonathan Haas and Winifred Kramer dated the site of Corral in central Peru back to nearly 2700 BC. This date alone means that organized civilization emerged in the New World almost 1,000 years earlier than previously determined. By its very nature, science is a self-correcting system, and new information is uncovered daily. Perhaps with further study, a complete history of Pampa Halagus and the Altiplano will be revealed.
I always thought that it was really the duty and the job of university to take over this complete study of the Bolivian Altiplano, and I'm quite happy to hand over all the materials and things that I've got. I think I've done my part, and I have by now awakened the world's attention to this site, and it's up to the other people there to take it forward.
Like the perfect crime that invites investigation, the mystery that surrounds Atlantis manages to elude a final resolution. Whether buried beneath the sea or hiding in the thin air of the Bolivian Andes, or a cautionary story told by a Greek philosopher. Atlantis remains lost in time.